I was 22 years old in June of 1942, an aviation machinist mate aboard the USS Enterprise. At that age, I believed I understood fear. Midway taught me otherwise. The first thing I remember about those days is not gunfire. It is the waiting. We were somewhere northeast of Midway Atoll, hidden in an empty reach of the Pacific that our charts called Point Luck. The name sounded like a joke. Around us, there was nothing but water, wind, and the long white wake behind the ship. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a Japanese fleet was moving toward us. We knew it was there, but we could not see it. We did not know its exact position. We did not know whether its scouts had already found us. We only knew that if the enemy appeared first and launched first, many of us would never see another sunrise. 6 months earlier, the war had come to Pearl Harbor. I had not been aboard Enterprise during the attack. Our carrier had been returning from a mission to deliver Marine fighters to Wake Island and was still at sea when Japanese aircraft came over Oahu on December 7th, 1941. Lexington was also away, carrying aircraft toward Midway, and Saratoga was near the American West Coast. That accident of timing saved the carriers of the Pacific Fleet. The battleships were not so fortunate. Later, when we entered Pearl Harbor, the destruction was difficult to understand. 21 American ships had been sunk or damaged, and 188 aircraft destroyed. The dead numbered 2,403, with 1,178 wounded. Arizona rested beneath the harbor with most of her dead still inside, while Oklahoma lay overturned. Yet Pearl Harbor had not been destroyed as a naval base. The Japanese had struck the ships and aircraft, but they had left the great fuel storage tanks standing. The repair yards and submarine facilities survived. Many damaged vessels were eventually raised and returned to service. The attack had wounded the Pacific Fleet terribly, but it had not taken away its ability to recover. At the time, we did not understand why Japan had chosen war with a country whose factories and resources were so much greater than its own. We learned the larger story later. For years, Japanese forces had been fighting in China and expanding across East Asia. The United States responded with economic pressure. In 1940, it restricted exports of aviation fuel, scrap metal, and other strategic materials. In the summer of 1941, after Japan moved farther into French Indochina, the United States froze Japanese assets and cut off access to oil. Japan depended heavily on imported petroleum. Its leaders faced a choice, though it was a choice created in part by their own conquests. They could withdraw from territories they had seized, or they could take the oil fields and raw materials of Southeast Asia by force. They chose the southern advance. To protect that advance, they believed they had to cripple the American Pacific Fleet. Pearl Harbor was meant to buy time. Japan would seize a defensive perimeter across the Pacific and Southeast Asia, then make the cost of breaking that perimeter so high that the United States might accept a negotiated peace. The architect of the Pearl Harbor strike was Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet. He knew the United States better than many Japanese leaders did. He had studied at Harvard and served as a naval attaché in Washington. He had seen American industry with his own eyes. He understood that Japan could not match the United States in a long war of production. His answer was the decisive battle. Strike hard, destroy the American carrier force, and force a political settlement before American industry reached full strength. In Japanese naval thinking, that final clash was often described as Kantai Kessen, the decisive fleet engagement. By the spring of 1942, Japan had conquered a vast area from Hong Kong and Malaya to the Dutch East Indies. Its advance looked unstoppable. Then American bombers appeared over Tokyo. The Doolittle raid in April caused little physical damage, but it shook the Japanese leadership. 16 American B-25 bombers had taken off from Hornet and struck the Japanese home islands. The raid proved that the emperor's capital was not beyond reach. Yamamoto became even more determined to extend Japan's defensive perimeter and destroy the American carriers. His chosen objective was Midway. Midway Atoll lay roughly 1,300 miles northwest of Honolulu. It consisted of two small islands, Sand and Easton, surrounded by a coral reef. It was not impressive to look at, but its position mattered. It served as an American air and submarine base, an outpost guarding the approaches to Hawaii. If Japan captured it, the United States would be forced to respond. Yamamoto expected the American carriers to come out from Pearl Harbor, where they could be located and destroyed by superior Japanese forces. The plan was vast and complicated. Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo would lead Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu toward Midway, followed by an invasion force. Yamamoto's battleships remained hundreds of miles behind. Submarines assigned east of Midway arrived too late to detect the American carriers leaving Pearl Harbor. In the north, Japan would attack the Aleutians and occupy Attu and Kiska, an operation with strategic aims of its own that might also distract the Americans. The Japanese forces were spread across thousands of miles of ocean. Their total strength was enormous, but much of it could not support Nagumo during the critical hours of the carrier battle. The plan depended on surprise, careful timing, and the assumption that the Americans did not know where the main blow would fall. That assumption was wrong. In a basement at Pearl Harbor, Commander Joseph Rochefort led Station Hypo, the Pacific Fleet's signals intelligence unit. He was not alone, and no honest account should pretend that one man broke Japan's naval code by himself. Rochefort worked with linguists, traffic analysts, cryptanalysts, radio operators, and intelligence officers. Among the senior figures were men such as Lieutenant Commander Edwin Layton, Admiral Chester Nimitz's fleet intelligence officer, and Lieutenant Commander Jasper Holmes, one of Rochefort's analysts. The Japanese naval code, known to the Americans as JN-25, had not been completely broken. Many messages could be read only in fragments, but fragments were enough to reveal patterns. The codebreakers saw evidence of a major operation against a target identified as AF. Rochefort's team believed AF meant Midway. Some officials in Washington were not convinced. They suspected other targets, perhaps in the Aleutians or elsewhere in the Pacific. To test the conclusion, Holmes proposed a simple deception. Midway was instructed to transmit an uncoded message reporting that its water distillation plant had broken down and that the island was short of fresh water. Soon afterward, American listening stations intercepted a Japanese message reporting that AF was short of water. That did not reveal every detail of Yamamoto's plan, but it confirmed the target. Through further analysis, Rochefort's team estimated the timing of the attack and the likely direction of the Japanese approach. Nimitz trusted the intelligence. That trust was one of the most important decisions of the war. Nimitz had only 3 carriers available: Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown. Yorktown had been damaged in the Battle of the Coral Sea in May. That battle was the first naval engagement in which the opposing surface fleets never came within sight of one another. Aircraft found and attacked ships beyond the horizon. The Japanese sank the American carrier Lexington and damaged Yorktown. The Americans sank the light carrier Shoho and prevented the Japanese seaborne invasion of Port Moresby. The deeper consequences reached Midway. The Japanese fleet carrier Shokaku had been badly damaged. Zuikaku survived, but its air group suffered serious losses and required reorganization. Neither ship joined Nagumo in June. The Japanese believed Yorktown would be unavailable. Under normal conditions, they would have been right. When Yorktown returned to Pearl Harbor, inspectors believed proper repairs would take months. Nimitz did not ask for proper repairs. He asked whether the ship could be made capable of fighting. The Navy Yard answered with men. For roughly 3 days, workers swarmed over Yorktown. They cut damaged steel, patched her flight deck, repaired electrical lines, restored essential systems, and strengthened what they could. They did not make her whole. They made her seaworthy enough to sail and dangerous enough to fight. Some repairmen were still aboard when she left Pearl Harbor. Enterprise and Hornet formed Task Force 16 under Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance. Our usual commander, Vice Admiral William Halsey, had been hospitalized and recommended Spruance in his place. Spruance was not an aviator, but he was calm and willing to listen. Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher commanded Task Force 17 from Yorktown and held overall tactical command of the carrier forces. Fletcher had fought at Coral Sea. He understood how quickly a carrier battle could turn and how little information a commander might have when making a decision. We sailed from Pearl Harbor without ceremony. There was no band, no speech, and no promise that we would return. The men on the flight deck secured aircraft and checked fuel lines. Mechanics worked beneath folded wings. Pilots studied charts that showed more empty ocean than land. Destroyers moved around us like guard dogs. At Point Luck, we waited northeast of Midway. The air smelled of salt, oil, hot metal, and aviation gasoline. We slept in short stretches. We knew the Japanese had 4 carriers, veteran air crews, agile Zero fighters, reliable torpedoes, and experienced deck crews. But we also knew something they did not. We knew the general shape of their plan, and we were already in position. On June 3, a patrol aircraft from Midway sighted part of the Japanese invasion force Hellcats. That was not yet Nagumo's carrier group, but it confirmed that the operation had begun. The following morning, before dawn, both sides started searching the ocean. At approximately 4:30 on June 4, Nagumo launched 108 aircraft against Midway. The strike included bombers, torpedo planes carrying bombs for the land attack, and fighter escorts. At the same time, Japanese reconnaissance aircraft moved out over assigned search sectors. One scout aircraft from the cruiser Tone was delayed by about half an hour. Its search sector included the waters where the American carriers were operating. The delay mattered, though it did not decide the battle by itself. Midway's patrol aircraft found Nagumo's carriers shortly after dawn. The report reached Fletcher. Yorktown had been conducting reconnaissance, So Spruance was ordered to launch from Enterprise and Hornet as soon as practical. The distance was great. The exact Japanese position was uncertain. Launching early meant some aircraft might have difficulty finding the enemy or returning with fuel remaining. Waiting meant Nagumo might find us first. Spruance chose to strike. On Enterprise, engines rose into a hard mechanical roar. Men crouched under the wind and pointed Wildcats, Devastators, and Dauntlesses forward. Each aircraft rolled down the deck, dropped toward the sea, and climbed away. I remember watching them go and thinking how small they looked once they left the ship. Hornet launched its group as well. Yorktown followed later. After recovering its search planes, the American formations did not remain together. Different squadrons flew different courses, at different altitudes, and at different speeds. Radio communication was limited. Some would find the Japanese, some would not. Meanwhile, the Japanese strike hit Midway. The island's defenders were ready. Radar detected the incoming aircraft, and fighters rose to meet them. Marine pilots fought with obsolete Brewster Buffaloes and a smaller number of Wildcats. They were badly outmatched. Japanese aircraft bombed buildings, fuel areas, and defensive positions, but Midway's runways remained usable, and many American aircraft had already taken off. The Japanese strike leader reported that another attack would be necessary. Nagumo now faced a difficult situation. He had kept a reserve for possible use against American ships. Some aircraft were armed for anti-ship missions, while others required preparation. After receiving the report from Midway, he ordered aircraft to be readied for another strike against the island. Then, reports of American forces began to arrive. The famous picture of Japanese flight decks packed with a strike, moments from takeoff, is not supported by modern research. Japanese carriers prepared many aircraft in enclosed hangars below. Rearming, refueling, recovering the Midway strike, and maintaining combat air patrols all required time. That truth does not make Nagumo's problem less serious. It makes it more understandable. He needed to recover aircraft returning from Midway. He needed to protect his carriers. He needed better information about the American ships. He needed to reorganize a coordinated anti-ship strike. Carrier operations could not be changed with the speed of a spoken command. At 7:28, the delayed scout from Tone reported American ships. The first message did not identify carriers. Nagumo continued trying to understand what was northeast of him. Later, the scout reported what appeared to be a carrier. By then, aircraft from Midway were attacking. Marine dive bombers, Navy torpedo bombers, Army B-26s, and high-flying B-17s came at the Japanese force in separate groups. They attacked with courage, but without coordination. Zeros and anti-aircraft guns tore through them. They scored no damaging hits on the carriers. Still, their attacks forced the Japanese ships to maneuver, kept combat air patrol fighters busy, and interrupted deck operations. In a carrier battle, time could be as important as armor. Our own torpedo squadrons arrived separately. Torpedo Squadron 8 from Hornet was led by Lieutenant Commander John Waldron. Hornet's main air group followed a course that failed to find the Japanese. Waldron believed the enemy lay farther to the southwest. He broke away and led his 15 Devastators directly toward Nagumo's carriers. They had no fighter protection when they attacked. The Devastator was slow, and its torpedo had to be released at low altitude and modest speed. That forced the pilots to fly straight towards ships, protected Zeros, and anti-aircraft fire. Waldron's men went in anyway. All 15 aircraft were shot down. 29 men were killed. Ensign George Gay was the only survivor, wounded and floating in the sea beneath a seat cushion while Japanese ships moved nearby. Torpedo Squadron 6 from Enterprise attacked next and suffered devastating losses. Torpedo Squadron 3 from Yorktown followed and was also cut apart. The American torpedoes scored no hits. To men watching reports come into the ship, the attacks seemed like slaughter without result. It would be wrong to claim that the torpedo squadrons alone pulled every Japanese fighter down to sea level or single-handedly opened the sky. Some Zeros remained at altitude, but the repeated low-level attacks forced the Japanese Combat Air Patrol to react again and again. Fighters became scattered, low on fuel, low on ammunition, and poorly positioned. Japan's carriers lacked radar-controlled fighter direction comparable to what the Americans were beginning to develop. The defense was dangerous, but it was not organized to meet a high-altitude dive bomber attack arriving at the same moment from another direction. Above them, the Enterprise dive bombers were searching an empty sea. Lieutenant Commander Clarence Wade McCluskey led the Enterprise Air Group. His Dauntlesses had flown beyond the expected interception point and were running low on fuel. Turning home would have saved aircraft, but it would have left the Japanese carriers untouched. Then McCluskey saw a ship below. It was the Japanese destroyer, Arashi, racing north after attacking the American submarine Nautilus. McCluskey judged that the destroyer was returning to the carrier force. He followed its wake. At the end of that line, Japanese carriers appeared. At almost the same time, Yorktown's dive bombers approached from another direction. The timing was not the product of a perfect American plan. It was the result of decisions, navigation, persistence, and chance. Yet when the moment came, it came with terrible precision. At about 10:20 in the morning, the Dauntlesses began their dives. From high altitude, a carrier looked up to cover with a hand. During a dive, it grew with frightening speed. The pilot pushed the nose down, opened the dive brakes, and aimed through anti-aircraft fire while the aircraft fell steeply toward the deck. He released his bomb, pulled back with all his strength, and hoped the wings stayed on. McCluskey's squadrons attacked Kaga and Akagi. Yorktown's dive bombers struck Soryu. The bombs did not find Japanese decks packed with aircraft ready to launch. They found something equally vulnerable. Carriers in the middle of complex flight operations, with fueled and armed aircraft in enclosed hangars below. Fire spread through aviation fuel, aircraft, ammunition, and machinery. Japanese damage control crews fought desperately, but the design and operating practices of the carriers made the fires extremely difficult to contain. Kaga took several hits and became an inferno. Soryu was struck repeatedly and burned from end to end. Akagi received only one direct bomb hit, but it penetrated near the flight deck and exploded in a position that caused catastrophic fires among aircraft and fuel below. Within minutes, 3 Japanese carriers were mortally damaged. We did not know that aboard Enterprise. We received reports, but battle reports were uncertain things. Pilots saw smoke and explosions, and sometimes believed they had hit one ship when they had struck another. Claims grew in the excitement. No one on our flight deck could look across the ocean and count 3 burning carriers. We knew only that our aircraft had found the enemy and that some were returning. They came back low on fuel, some with holes in their wings and wounded men inside. Many returning pilots arrived nearly out of fuel. Deck crews cleared barriers, fought small fire fears, and moved damaged aircraft aside. Then we learned that one Japanese carrier remained. Hiryu had escaped the morning attack. Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi, commanding the carrier division aboard her, acted quickly. While Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu burned, Hiryu launched a counterstrike. The first Japanese group followed returning American aircraft and found Yorktown. Yorktown's radar detected the approach. Wildcats intercepted, and anti-aircraft guns opened fire. Many Japanese aircraft were shot down, but enough broke through. 3 bombs hit the carrier. 1 bomb struck the flight deck and exploded below. Another caused severe damage near the smokestack and extinguished fires in several boilers. Yorktown slowed and stopped. Smoke rose above her, and the Japanese pilots reported that they had crippled an American carrier. Yorktown's crew refused to let her remain dead in the water. Damage control parties attacked the fires. Engineers restored power. Men worked in heat, smoke, and darkness to repair what could be repaired. In a little more than an hour, Yorktown was moving again. When Hiryu's second strike arrived, its pilots saw a carrier steaming at speed. They believed they had found a second American carrier. In fact, it was Yorktown again. This time, torpedo planes attacked from both sides. 2 torpedoes struck the port side. Yorktown took a heavy list. Power failed. Captain Elliot Buckmaster ordered the crew to abandon ship because he feared the carrier might capsize. Men climbed down lines and nets into the sea. Destroyers moved close to collect them. Yorktown remained afloat, wounded but not yet lost. While she was being attacked, American search aircraft located Hiryu. In the late afternoon, Enterprise launched another strike, including Dauntlesses from Enterprise and aircraft from Yorktown that had landed aboard us after their own carrier was disabled. They found Hiryu near sunset. The last Japanese carrier was struck by 4 bombs. A forward flight deck and hangar spaces erupted in flames. Yamaguchi chose to remain aboard. Hiryu burned through the night. Like Akagi, she was later scuttled by Japanese destroyers on June 5. Kaga and Soryu had gone down earlier. All 4 Japanese carriers had been fatally struck on June 4, though not all sank that same day. That night, the Pacific was dark, except where burning ships lit the horizon beyond our sight. Yamamoto still had battleships and cruisers. For a time, he considered continuing the operation and seeking a night engagement. A night action might have favored Japan's well-trained surface forces. Spruance withdrew eastward while remaining ready to return in daylight. By the early hours of June 5, Yamamoto understood that without carrier air cover, he could not continue the invasion. He ordered the operation cancelled. The battle did not end at once. American aircraft attacked retreating Japanese cruisers, sinking Mikuma and damaging Mogami. Yorktown still floated, and a salvage party returned aboard. The destroyer Haman came alongside to provide power and assistance. On June 6, the Japanese submarine I-168 penetrated the destroyer screen and fired torpedoes. One struck Haman, which broke apart and sank. Others hit Yorktown. The carrier survived through the night, but finally rolled over and sank on June 7. For those who had watched her leave Pearl Harbor after 3 days of desperate repair, the loss felt personal. Yorktown had fought at Coral Sea, returned wounded, sailed again, survived 2 Japanese airstrikes at Midway, and remained afloat long enough to be attacked by a submarine. She had done everything asked of her. The United States lost Yorktown, Hammond, about 150 aircraft, and 307 men in the battle. Japan lost the 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, the heavy cruiser Mikuma, roughly 250 aircraft, and more than 3,000 men. The Japanese aircrew losses have often been exaggerated. More than 100 trained airmen were killed, while many veterans survived. But carriers were more than pilots and flight decks. Japan also lost mechanics, armorers, engineers, deck crews, and 4 ships around which its striking power had been built. More important, Japan lost the strategic initiative. Midway did not end the Pacific War. It did not make American victory inevitable, and no honest veteran would say that the road afterward was easy. Japan still possessed powerful fleets, skilled airmen, fortified bases, and armies spread across an enormous empire. 2 months later, Americans landed on Guadalcanal and entered a campaign of exhaustion that lasted half a year. Many of the Japanese aviators who survived Midway would die in the Solomons. Many Americans who celebrated Midway would not survive the battles that followed. But before Midway, Japan had chosen the direction and pace of the war. After Midway, it could no longer conduct major carrier operations with the same strength. The United States had stopped an invasion, destroyed the core of the force that attacked Pearl Harbor, and preserved 2 of its 3 carriers. Our victory came from no single cause. It came from intelligence officers who recognized that AF meant Midway, and from Nimitz, who trusted them. It came from the workers who made Yorktown ready to sail. It came from Fletcher and Spruance, who made decisions with incomplete information. It came from the defenders of Midway, whose resistance forced the Japanese command to keep reacting. It came from pilots who searched beyond the point where fuel calculations told them to turn home. It came from dive bombers that arrived over the target at the right moment. And it came at a terrible price from the torpedo squadrons. The men of Torpedo 8 did not fly, knowing with certainty that they would die. They were not on a suicide mission. They went to attack enemy carriers and hoped to return, but they understood the odds. They knew their aircraft were slow, their fighter cover was absent, and the enemy was waiting. They went anyway. Their torpedoes did not strike the Japanese ships. Their attack did not win the battle by itself. History becomes dishonest when courage is turned into a simple legend. Yet their approach forced the enemy to fight at low altitude, added to the confusion around the Japanese formation, and became part of the chain of events that made the dive bomber attack possible. Years later, people asked what it felt like to know that we had turned the war. The truth is that we did not know it then. We knew we had survived. We knew aircraft were missing and bunks would remain empty. We knew Yorktown had been abandoned and that somewhere behind us, Japanese ships were burning. We knew men had gone into the water and had not been found. There was no clean triumph, only relief, exhaustion, grief, and the silence after violence. On the flight deck, aircraft still had to be fueled, moved, and repaired. The horizon did not announce that history had changed. Only later did we understand. Japan had sailed to Midway intending to complete the work begun at Pearl Harbor. It expected to seize an island, lure out the American carriers, and destroy them in a decisive battle. Instead, its plan was exposed, its carrier force was ambushed, and 4 of its most important ships were lost. The battle was that it came from nowhere. It was prepared by intelligence, repair work, training, command judgment, and sacrifice. Nor was it a perfect American operation. Our formations became separated. Some squadrons flew the wrong course. Torpedoes failed. Reports were confused. Chance played its part, as it does in every battle. But when the critical minutes arrived, enough men made the right decisions. That is what I remember most clearly after all these years. Not that we were fearless, we were not. Not that we understood the importance of every action. We did not. We were young men doing the work in front of us, while the ocean carried us toward an enemy we could not see. At around 10:30, on the morning of June 4, 1942, 3 Japanese carriers were burning. By the end of the day, the 4th had been fatally struck. The fleet sent to trap us had entered a trap of its own. Midway did not buy the entire war. Too many men still had to fight and die for anyone to make such a claim. But it bought time. It denied Japan the decisive victory Yamamoto needed. It gave the United States a chance to move from defense toward offense. Before Midway, the Japanese tide had risen across the Pacific. After Midway, it would never rise so far again.